Let me go across to Pallavi Ghosh as well. So Pallavi, as we now wait, I think the final few guests are arriving in the next few minutes. I think the culmination, of course, will be the US President Joe Biden. What are the expectation levels like in the Sherpas team, in the Chief Coordinators team, and of course, various ministry officials who are working round the clock to be able to not just find a joint communique, that of course is important, that will be the focus of all the headlines, but also finding an outcome document that is meaty and substantial.
Yes, absolutely. And while India still continues to remain extremely optimistic about a joint declaration, because that's exactly what we were told yesterday, that our joint declaration is ready, but it only needs now to be thrashed out or vetted when that real meeting of the G20 summit really begins. Of course, the focus is going to be on trade, defense as economic ties, because that becomes extremely critical, really, Zaka, in the backdrop of the situation which is happening in the post-COVID times and so on and so forth. And we've been talking about it, cryptocurrency, UPI, economic offenders, and FTA with UK for that matter. These are going to be the very nitty-gritty. But I think the Russia-Ukraine war is likely to be one important factor, how India is able to negotiate both with Russian authorities as well as with Chinese. Also, another point which we were told by way of a debriefing which went on was also the fact that of China. China is going to be a factor which is going to loom large, unlike China and many of the countries who are going to be a part of these deliberations day long today. They don't consider themselves to be expansionist in nature. They feel that they are more accommodative, and India as a precedent really has to show the way, and a lot will depend on the negotiating power. I mean, the Prime Minister is backed by a very strong and sturdy team. S. Jaishankar, I mean, we know his negotiating power. There have been several success stories. Ajit Doval also. All of them are very good negotiators, and I think they're going to use all their might to ensure that India's presidency actually ends with a joint declaration. It can come out to some kind of amicable middle part vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine. So these are going to be difficult negotiators as far as Russia, China and Saudi Arabia, for reasons what I've been talking about earlier. But I think Indian side is quite confident that if not all of it, at least most of the joint declaration which has been put on the agenda for today will be acceptable, and India is certainly very hopeful that we may actually by the end of the day come out with a joint declaration tomorrow.
All right, as we see Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, and again, Brazil is important because it's the next host of the G20. He's accompanied by his spouse as well. They will, of course, be warmly welcomed by the Prime Minister. Like I said, Brazil, Indonesia, India, the previous president, the current president, of course, the next president, these countries represent also members of the emerging world. And the emerging world is really one of the reasons why the G20 came into existence, was because the world realized back in the Asian financial crisis and also subsequently in the 2008 global financial crisis that you cannot just have this elite Western-led worldview to be able to solve the world's problems. And of course, the Chinese Premier Li Qiang has just walked in, and this is going to be the first time that Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese Premier Li Qiang will be meeting each other. Remember, Li Qiang, of course, is here because Xi Jinping, the president of China, decided to give a skip. There was no official reason given as to why he decided to not attend the G20 summit. And of course, from the Indian side, it was like whoever wants to come can come, and whoever doesn't want to come, it is their loss. So the first time that Prime Minister Modi and Premier Li Qiang of China will be meeting and shaking hands. Of course, is China trying to send a signal by not sending their leader, Chinese President Xi Jinping? That, of course, is an open question, no doubt. But all eyes will be on Li Qiang because this is he was also there in Jakarta for the East Asia Summit just last week, in the ASEAN Summit just a few days ago. Again, this is the first time that he's going outside of China and taking part and leading the Chinese delegation in very, very important, critical multilateral summits. And whether or not the Chinese delegation under Li Qiang has the authority, has the elbow room to be flexible about negotiating a text, an arrangement, a draft which is acceptable to all sides. Remember, China has also taken a very, very strident position backing Russia on the Ukraine war. It's almost like the geopolitical arc, as it were, has the United States and its Western partners, its European partners on the one side, and then in the other corner you have Russia and China, you have Beijing and Moscow, which are seemingly coordinating these steps. Yes, of course, the fact that the leaders of China and Russia are not attending the G20 may be coincidental, but make no mistake about this, there will be a lot of focus on Li Qiang, the Chinese premier, and whether or not he is able to carve his own space in these multilateral arrangements. The previous premier, Li Keqiang, was kind of overshadowed by Xi Jinping in many of these multilateral arrangements, many of the important bilateral relationships as well. In fact, the Prime Minister had met with Xi Jinping more than a dozen times over the 9 years that he's been in office. Now this is the first time he is, of course, going to be engaged with Li Qiang. There is no separate pull-aside bilateral between China and India on the sidelines of the G20, and perhaps, I guess, India is also trying to send out a signal that if China is not taking seriously this multilateral arrangement which India is hosting this year, then there is no reason for India to be reciprocating any kind of favor, as it were.